Greetings, everyone. There are plenty of references in Scripture warning us of calamities in the future. Is there anything we can do to prepare for the challenges in the years ahead? Welcome to my podcast, A Psychologist Looks at Scripture. My name is Peter Doherty. I'm a Catholic priest and a psychologist who integrates my training in psychology and Scripture studies to help understand the Gospels from a different perspective and focus on new pastoral teachings for Christians. The Gospels provide us with a rich source of learning about God and developing our spirituality. We are far from exhausting the learning potential. My podcasts are between 7 to 10 minutes in length, where I share insights and reflections that I hope will be useful to you. Please don't hesitate to contact me with questions or comments. I always love to hear from my listeners. Today's podcast is from Luke chapter 21, verse 25 to 28, 34 to 36. This gospel will be read in churches on December the 1st, 2024. Today's reading from Luke may remind you of the podcast we published 2 weeks ago about the end times. Luke's account has Jesus talking about a time of upheaval and fear. Many people have come to interpret that time as the end of the world. People in biblical times interpreted these warnings quite literally and expected the second coming of Jesus to come in their lifetime. Jesus is described a time of change, but we are reminded that God is with us, and so, rather than instill fear, Jesus is giving us advice about how to go forward. We are reminded of what it takes to deal with turmoil and uncertainty. In the face of all this turmoil, we are counseled to stand erect and raise our heads because redemption is at hand. So in the presence of all this turmoil is redemption. Out of this chaos comes something we have always wanted, to be redeemed. I'd like to further unpack Jesus' view of standing tall. What does it take to stand tall? Jesus teaches us not to be frightened. Luke chapter 21, verse 9. You will bear testimony to me. Luke chapter 21, verse 13. Make up your mind not to worry. Worry is rarely useful, as evidenced by Lucas Lefren and Michelle Newman in their published research entitled Exposing Worry's Deceit, Percentage of Untrue Worries and Generalized Anxiety Disorder Treatment, in the Journal of Behavioral Therapy, published in 2020. Overall, the evidence suggests that a large portion of our worries are either exaggerated or unfounded, with estimates indicating that 85 to 91% of all that we worry about does not happen. This realization can be liberating and may encourage individuals to adopt strategies for managing anxiety, such as keeping a worry journal or practicing mindfulness techniques. A few other suggestions I'd like to make, which may be helpful in reducing worry, are deep breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, which is tensing and relaxing different muscle groups, and of course, regular exercise. Problem-solving techniques, for example, if a worry arises, ask yourself if it is something that you can change. If so, focus on a plan. If you cannot change it, ask yourself if it's something that you can develop a strategy to reduce the anxiety or the negative impact. Another strategy is reducing your caffeine and alcohol intake to help reduce anxiety levels. Surprisingly, these substances can exacerbate feelings of worry and anxiety. Don't be too concerned if you find it difficult to change, or if your progress is slow. Change takes time and practice. We are encouraged to stand firm in Luke chapter 21, verse 19, and be careful, Luke 21, verse 34. These are valuable lessons for life, not just for coping with the end times, but also they are applicable in the present moment. Before I move on, I thought I would help you by presenting you with a few motivational quotes that might be useful to you. 1. Do not anticipate worry or worry about what may never happen. Keep it in the sunlight. Benjamin Franklin. Worry often gives a small thing a big shadow. This is a Swedish proverb. People become attached to their burdens, sometimes more than the burdens become attached to them. George Bernard Shaw. Worry never robs tomorrow of its sorrow. It only saps today of its joy. Leo Buscaglia. And my all-time favorite is, worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't take you anywhere. Unfortunately, the author is not known. I wonder if Jesus was talking about the end of the world or teaching us something about our spiritual lives. I wonder if Jesus is telling us to be resilient and be determined. Yes, there will be challenges, but these challenges do not have to lead to fear. We can develop resilience in our lives through prayer and meditation, scripture study, and building relationships. Being a member of a supportive community is critical in the development of resilience. Humans are a social creation. We need community. So seek wise counsel. Having wise mentors and wise counselors can help develop resilience. Developing a sense of gratitude, seeing our trials as an opportunity for growth. I also want to stress the notion of self-care as critical for maintaining our life and health. Jesus is specific when he names potential threats to our development. Carousing, drunkenness, and even being anxious can separate us from God. We are called to be vigilant. Being vigilant is a frequent theme in Jesus' teaching. To be vigilant is to be aware of our environment, to know what is going on around us. Sometimes what we experience in this life is not clear, or there are many levels to pay attention to. We are called to be intentional in our actions. To be intentional requires us to choose to be so. Much of our lives are an automatic pilot. We have our routines and habits, and this is not necessarily bad. Having our routines allows us to focus on other things as we tend to day-to-day activities that we normally handle on a regular basis. Much of our behavior, though, is a response to and as a result of other people's behavior. Many worry that if they do not respond in kind, they will be seen as weak. Sometimes the response is automatic. While such behavior is understandable, we are called to go beyond that. I'm talking about self-control. Self-control takes practice, and like wisdom, it doesn't always come with age. Fortunately, there are strategies to cultivate better self-control. Developing self-awareness. Know and understand your triggers and behaviors. Know and reflect on situations where you struggle with self-control. Make small changes to gradually build up your self-discipline. Remove temptation. Maintain healthy routines. Establish consistent daily routines for sleep, meals, and exercise. Together, these support us. Together, these support overall well-being and self-control. Adequate rest is vital. Reward yourself. Positive reinforcement encourages continued effort and builds up motivation that can be helpful when you find yourself triggered by temptations. Our faith is lived out in how we relate to people and to God. Last week we read the greatest commandment was to love God, and the second was to love our neighbor. Both laws, if you'll notice, are relational. It's in time of need and conflict that we live our faith. Our faith can lead to choices that may not be understood by many. Often the results of our good choices do not become apparent immediately, and in some cases, we may never notice their positive impact. Staying faithful to our beliefs means knowing ourselves. That may seem obvious, but knowing what is important to you will help you not get distracted or drift off course when confronted with alternative choices. Being faithful to our beliefs is not being rigid. There is value in being open, listening to others' arguments. It's a sign of immaturity to refuse to listen. Trying to understand another's point of view doesn't minimize your position. Jesus frequently listens to what the Pharisees had to say, even though he knew they were trying to trap him. Some individuals will have to work harder not to have an emotional response to a threatening situation. It's part of their personality. They often feel very passionate about their beliefs. St. Peter is a perfect example of someone who was reactive, but over time his passion matured into a well-grounded faith. Being vigilant is a willingness to learn from experience and use the learning to understand better what is going on around you. Jesus incorporated many of his observations into parables, making them so relatable to the people. Jesus talked about sheep, lost coins, yeast rising, vineyards, and the harvest, and the common events that his listeners would be familiar with and could relate to. As I mentioned before, change takes time. Be gentle with yourself. It's not a race. Positive change will have a positive impact on your spiritual as well as emotional life. Trust me, it's worth the challenge and struggle. Thank you for listening. I invite you to join me next week when I examine the Gospel of Luke, who describes the role of John the Baptist, easily the greatest of all the saints, an incredible role model for Christians. If this is the first time you've heard my podcast and you're interested in hearing more, I urge you to listen to my podcast listed on the website. Every Sunday, I release a new podcast focusing on the gospel for the following week. I invite you to listen to all the podcasts, and I hope the reflections are useful. The podcast, A Psychologist Looks at Scripture, is found in most of the platforms that carry podcasts. The podcast is also available on YouTube. Please do not hesitate to subscribe and leave a review. Feedback from my listeners can be helpful when I develop the podcast. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank my team, Heather Patel-Doherty and Richard Coulombe, who play an important part in the preparation for this podcast. If you have any questions or concerns, I can be reached by email at peter.doherty, DOHERTYOMI, @gmail.com. God bless and have a great week.